Let's go to foreign affairs now, and an unusual event today when a senior official from the Chinese embassy in Canberra spoke at the National Press Club. Talk about transparency. I'm joined from Canberra by the head of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Michael Shoebridge, who's always good to talk to on issues China. Michael, tell us about just how unusual it is for China to put up such a leading diplomat speaking publicly and taking questions from the media.
Very unusual, particularly when you compare it with his boss, the ambassador's recent outing where he gave a media interview and did his wolf warrior impersonation, threatening Australia. And instead, today we've got the deputy ambassador on a bit of a charm offensive with some beautiful flowery language. Like when you look at the sun, you can't see the shadows, and other lovely ideas.
You also burn out your retinas. You also burn out your retinas if you look at the sun. I wouldn't be advising that.
No, so I think this was, we're seeing this with China in other relationships, with Japan and with South Korea. You know, the ground being prepared for a lovely visit from Xi Jinping to South Korea to meet with President Moon. Maybe we're starting to see the flip side of Chinese diplomacy when the naked coercion around wine and barley is having the opposite effect. Maybe they're starting to think this is not the way to deal with Australia. Yeah. I hope so. But we could be back in wolf warrior territory any time now. Yeah,
that would be a very optimistic reading. Maybe they switch back to charm. As you say, let's hope so. But let's have a look at some of what went on today. This is an interesting response where we hear a pushback from Australia's push for that international independent investigation into the origins of the Wuhan coronavirus and the fact that it might actually have hurt Chinese feelings.
It also entrusts WHO to direct the entire work of evaluation. So this is fair, this is useful, this is non-discriminatory. But more importantly, it hurts the feeling of the Chinese people.
Mr. Wang there talking about Chinese hurt feelings, and I'll just show this tweet from Dave Sharma that Kieran Gilbert was showing us earlier. Dave Sharma, of course, a former diplomat, now member for Wentworth, says hurt feelings. At last count, COVID-19 had killed 800,000 people, caused all this greatest disruption since the Great Depression. Getting to the bottom of it, if it generates some hurt feelings, that's the least of our concerns. That's a very realistic response from Dave Sharma, isn't it, Michael?
Exactly. I think this is code for the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want this inquiry. It was forced by the weight of world opinion after Australia's very successful diplomatic campaign to go along with the inquiry into the pandemic. Chinese people have died just like the rest of us. It's as in the interests of the 1.4 billion Chinese people to have this inquiry. So this is the deputy ambassador using Chinese people's feelings as a cloak for what the Chinese Communist Party does and doesn't like. And he couldn't help himself. He was asked about China's coercion of Australia over trade, and he said, oh, it's just technicalities. And then he went off into this flight about how hurt China's people's feelings were, which is mainline policy out of the Chinese government.
Yeah, it was interesting stuff. Let's have a look here where he talks about foreign interference in other countries and how he tries to build a false equivalence, I suppose.
Policy is we never interfere into others' internal affairs, and we're not imposing anything onto other countries. We're not changing Australia to be a People's Republic of Australia. We're not trying to replace your parliamentary system with a presidential system. We're not asking Hungry Jack to sell Chinese dumpling.
There you go. We should be relieved. They're not trying to turn us into a rogue province, Michael.
No, but that's exactly right. I mean, this is not the Soviet Union trying to make a Soviet satellite states. But what he fails to mention is they do want to coerce and corrupt other countries' political systems, including Australia's, which is what we saw with the scandals around Chinese money in our political parties and why we enacted laws against it. We also know that they do large-scale cyber hacking, including around medical research. Nothing that the Deputy Ambassador said changes that.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Fascinating times in the China-Australian relationship, of course, not to mention China's relationships with the US and the rest of the world.